My name is Daniel Mercer, and until a quiet Tuesday afternoon last spring, I believed I understood my life fairly well. I lived alone in a modest apartment in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. My days were simple. I edited manuscripts for small publishing houses, mostly from my desk near the window. The work was quiet, steady, and suited the kind of person I had slowly become. That afternoon, I was standing in line at a neighborhood pharmacy on Market Street. I had been feeling sick all morning. Nothing dramatic. Just a dull pressure behind my eyes and the kind of fatigue that makes every small task feel slightly heavier than it should. The pharmacy smelled faintly of disinfectant and paper receipts. A refrigerator hummed somewhere behind the counter. I remember looking down at my phone, reading an email from a client who was unusually passionate about punctuation. Then someone behind me said something. "You look exactly like my sister." It was said gently, not loudly. Just a quiet observation the way strangers sometimes comment on the weather or the length of the line. I gave the polite smile people usually give in those moments. I was about to say something neutral, something forgettable, when I noticed the woman wasn't smiling. She was studying my face very carefully. Her gray hair was tied into a tight bun. Gardening gloves were tucked into the side pocket of her canvas bag. She looked like someone who had spent the morning outside. But her expression had changed. There was something heavier in it, recognition mixed with disbelief. Then she said something that made the air feel suddenly thinner. My sister disappeared when she was 6. I didn't answer. The cashier called the next customer forward. A scanner beeped twice. Somewhere behind us, a child knocked over a display of cough drops. I focused on the counter in front of me, waiting for the line to move. Then the woman said a name. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't even close. But something about the way she said it made the back of my neck tighten. I didn't correct her. And the strange thing is, I didn't correct her because a small, quiet part of my mind was already wondering if she might be right. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I went home with the prescription still sitting untouched inside the pharmacy bag. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic drifting in from the street below. I kept replaying those few moments in the pharmacy. The way she had looked at me, the certainty in her voice, and that name. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror longer than I should have, studying my face with a kind of detached curiosity. My eyes, the faint scar above my left eyebrow. I had been told I got it when I fell from a swing as a child. My parents always described the story the same way. They rushed me to urgent care. My mother held my hand while the doctor stitched the cut. I knew the story very well, but as I stood there staring at the scar, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't remember the moment itself. I only remembered the story. At 34, I thought I was long past the stage of questioning basic things about my childhood. I grew up in Tacoma. After college, I moved to Seattle and built a quiet life editing manuscripts and living alone. I spoke to my parents every Sunday evening like clockwork. They were good people, careful people, but there were also small gaps in my early memories that I had never really examined. There were no photographs of me before age 3. Whenever I asked about that, my mother always gave the same explanation. A house fire. Years ago, she said, it destroyed the boxes of baby photos and keepsakes. The explanation had always seemed reasonable, until that night, because now the story felt slightly too neat. Around 2 in the morning, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out a small USB drive my mother had sent me years earlier. It contained scanned family photos for a slideshow I made during my parents' 30th anniversary. I plugged it into my laptop. The earliest photo appeared on the screen. I was sitting in a park wearing small denim overalls and holding a melting popsicle. The file name read birthday_03.jpg. I clicked through the rest. Birthday parties, school photos, camping trips. Every image began at the same point. Age 3. Before that, nothing. No hospital pictures. No baby blanket. No toddler years. Just a child who seemed to appear in the world already old enough to smile at a camera. I leaned back in my chair. Then I remembered something else. My birth certificate. I had only looked at it once, years ago, when applying for a passport. At the time I noticed something small. It looked unusually new, not aged the way most documents do. At the time, I didn't think much about it, but now the memory sat differently. The woman's voice from the pharmacy returned to me again. My sister disappeared when she was 6. I closed the laptop slowly. By morning, I knew one thing for certain. I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't dismiss the idea too quickly. So just before noon, I called my friend Claire. She worked as a pediatric nurse at a hospital downtown. Claire had a habit of looking directly at problems instead of politely ignoring them. An hour later, she knocked on my apartment door holding 2 iced coffees. She stepped inside, looked at my face, and said quietly, "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," I said. She sat down on the couch and waited. So I told her everything. The pharmacy, the woman, the name, the missing photographs, the strange memory gaps. Claire listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back against the couch cushion and crossed her arms. For a moment, she didn't speak. Then she said something that shifted the room in a way I didn't expect. If someone walked up to me and described things about my life they shouldn't know, she said calmly, "The first thing I'd do is check the facts." I rubbed my hands together slowly. "What facts?" Claire reached for my laptop. "We start with a name," she said. I hesitated. Then I said it out loud for the first time since the pharmacy. "Evan." Claire's fingers paused above the keyboard. "Evan what?" "I don't know." She typed anyway. "Evan. Missing child. Oregon. Washington. Nothing." She added another word. "Missing." Then narrowed the date range. Claire's screen refreshed. She leaned closer. And then she said quietly, "Well, that's interesting." I stood up and walked behind her. On the screen was a profile page. A woman standing in a garden surrounded by sunflowers. Her name was Linda Archer. Her bio said, "Advocate for missing children. Sister survivor." Claire clicked into her photo albums. One of them had a title that made my chest tighten. Never forgotten, she opened it. The first picture appeared. A school photo of a boy around 6 years old. Short brown hair. Green eyes. A small scar just above the left eyebrow. I didn't speak. Neither did Claire. We just sat there quietly looking at the screen. Finally, Claire said softly, "I think you need to talk to her." I stared at the photo a little longer. Then I nodded once. Later that afternoon, I wrote a message. I rewrote it 5 times before finally sending it. It was simple. "Hi, my name is Daniel. We met yesterday at the pharmacy. I think we may need to talk." She replied 10 minutes later. "Thank you. I've been hoping you would." We agreed to meet the next morning. A small cafe near Pike Street. Neutral ground. Quiet. After sending the message, I set the phone face down on the table. Then I waited. I got to the cafe early. It was one of those narrow places with dark wood tables, low-hanging lights, and a pastry case near the register that always smelled faintly of cinnamon. The espresso machine hissed in short bursts. Cups touched saucers. Someone near the front door was reading a newspaper the old-fashioned way, folding each page carefully. I chose a table near the window. Not because I wanted the view. I wanted the exit. I ordered tea, though I wasn't sure I could drink it. My hands kept moving without permission. First the paper sleeve around the cup, then the spoon, then the edge of the napkin. At exactly 9:10, Linda Archer walked in. Same gray hair, same canvas tote, same measured way of moving, like she had spent the entire night telling herself not to rush this moment. She saw me and stopped for half a second. Then she came over. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. Her voice was quiet, careful. Not fragile exactly. More like someone trying very hard not to mishandle something breakable. "I almost didn't," I said. "I know." She sat down across from me and placed her tote bag on the chair beside her. Then she set a slim manila folder on the table between us, but she did not open it right away. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The waitress came over. I already had tea. Linda asked for water and nothing else. When the waitress walked away, Linda folded her hands and looked at me steadily. "I need to say this first," she said. "I'm not here to force anything on you. I'm not here to take your life apart. If I'm wrong, I will accept that. But I have lived with this for 28 years, and when I saw you yesterday, she stopped there and looked down briefly. I couldn't walk away from it. I nodded once. That was all I could manage. She opened the folder. Inside were copies. Newspaper clippings, missing person flyers, a school photo, a grainy image of a backyard with a swing set in the corner. Everything was arranged neatly in plastic sleeves, labeled in small, tidy handwriting. No drama, no theatrical reveal, just paper. She slid the first photo toward me. A boy standing beside a bicycle with one hand on the handlebar. He looked about 6. He was wearing a striped t-shirt, one sock slightly lower than the other, and he was squinting in the sun. He looked like me. Not vaguely. Not in the loose, flattering way people sometimes resemble each other. I mean, he looked like me in the specific places that matter. The shape around the eyes, the brow, the mouth at rest, even the slight tilt of the head. I didn't touch the photo. Linda spoke carefully, as if she had learned over many years how to tell this story without letting it swallow the room. My brother's name was Evan Archer, she said. He disappeared in June of 1998 from our backyard in Eugene. I was 14. I was supposed to be watching him. I kept my eyes on the photo. What happened? She took a breath. Our mother was inside on the phone. I went to get him a popsicle. I was gone maybe 4 minutes. She paused. When I came back, the gate was open. The cafe noise seemed to move farther away. I could still hear cups being stacked, milk steaming, chairs scraping softly across the floor. But it all felt distant now. There was an investigation, she continued. Police, search teams, volunteers. They looked everywhere. Woods, drainage ditches, neighboring streets. For a while there were tips, then fewer tips, then nothing useful. She slid another item from the folder. A copy of a missing poster. Evan Archer, age 6 below it was a phone number and a description. Brown hair, green eyes, small scar above left eyebrow. I felt my own hand rise, almost by reflex, toward the scar. Linda noticed, but said nothing. Then she reached into the tote bag and pulled out something else. A clear plastic pouch. Inside was a child's bracelet made of braided blue cord and 3 plastic beads. I stared at it. Something in me reacted before I understood why. Not a memory exactly. More like recognition without context. Linda watched my face. You used to hate wearing coats, she said quietly. Even when it rained. My mother used to bribe you with gummy bears to get you into one. I let out a slow breath. I don't remember that. I know. There was no accusation in her voice. That was what made it harder. She wasn't trying to persuade me with emotion. She was simply placing facts where I could see them. I finally picked up the school photo. The paper felt cool and smooth at the edges. I was told I grew up in Tacoma, I said. Linda nodded once, as if she had expected that. Maybe you did. After. The word sat there between us. After. Not before. After. I set the photo down carefully. My parents said our old photos were destroyed in a fire. Linda looked at the table for a moment before answering. That may be what they needed to say. I looked out the window. A man in a rain jacket passed by carrying tulips wrapped in brown paper. A bus exhaled at the curb. Morning traffic moved the way it always moved. Ordinary. That was the strange part. The day had not changed at all. Only the frame around it had. Then Linda opened the folder one more time and took out a sealed box. A home DNA test kit. She set it on the table without pushing it toward me. I already did mine, she said. You don't owe me this. But if you want certainty, this is the cleanest way I know. I looked at the box. White cardboard. Barcode sticker. Instructions printed on the side. Plain. Clinical. Quiet. I appreciated that. No one had to make a speech about destiny. No one had to cry. A process. A result. A date stamp. That I could understand. What if it's true? I asked. Linda didn't answer immediately. When she finally did, her voice was low and even. Then we know the truth. And then we deal with the truth. I sat there for a long moment. Then I reached for the box. The cardboard was lighter than I expected. Linda gave a small nod, but otherwise didn't move. I read the instructions twice. Open swab. Rotate inside cheek. Seal tube. Register sample. Simple. My hands were steady now. That was the part one noticed. Not because I felt calm. I didn't. But because something in me had shifted from confusion into sequence. One question at a time. One fact at a time. One step, then the next. I completed the swab at the table, sealed the sample, and placed it back in the box. Linda slid a prepaid envelope across to me. I can drop it off, she said. I looked at her, then shook my head. No, I said. I'll mail it myself. She accepted that immediately. No argument. No reassurance. Just a quiet understanding that some actions need to belong to the person taking them. We stood a few minutes later. Neither of us tried to hug. At the door, Linda said, "Whatever this says, I'm glad you came." I nodded. Then I stepped outside holding the small white box in one hand. The air smelled like wet pavement and coffee grounds. I walked 3 blocks to the post office annex on Pine. I stood in line behind a man mailing fishing gear to Idaho. And when it was my turn, I slid the envelope across the counter and watched the clerk stamp it. Then I left. By the time I reached my apartment, there was a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was light, almost casual. "Hi, honey. Just checking in. You sounded a little off yesterday. Call when you can." I stood in my kitchen listening to it twice. Then I put the phone face down. And I did not call back. The waiting was its own kind of work. People talk about uncertainty as if it is passive, but it isn't. It has texture. It settles into the room with you. It changes how you move through ordinary things. How long you stand at the sink. How often you check your phone without admitting you're checking it. For the next 6 days, I kept my routine as intact as I could. I answered client emails. I marked up 2 chapters of a historical novel set in Boston. I bought groceries on Wednesday morning, the way I always did, and stood too long in front of the produce section trying to decide whether I actually needed lemons or just wanted something bright in the apartment. At night, though, I started looking more carefully at my life. Not emotionally. Structurally. That was the only way I knew how to do it without falling apart. I took out a legal pad and wrote 3 lines at the top. Step 1. Verify documents. Step 2. Build a timeline. Step 3. Do not confront anyone without facts. Then I started. I requested a certified copy of my birth certificate online, not the photocopy I remembered from years ago. I ordered a record search through the county listed on the document. I checked my passport application file and found the scanned version I had submitted years earlier. Then I made a second list. First pediatrician. First school. First address. Emergency contacts. Immunization records. The details were small, but small details have edges. They either line up or they don't. By Thursday afternoon, they didn't. The birth certificate listed a hospital in Medford, Oregon. I called the records department and kept my voice neutral. I gave them the date, the name, the spelling twice. The woman on the line tapped at a keyboard. Then she said, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm not seeing a matching birth record in our archive delivery logs. Could it be under a different filing system?" I asked. "It's possible," she said politely, "but for that year, we're usually able to verify by mother's name as well." I gave my mother's name. Another pause. Still no match. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I wrote 1 sentence on the pad in neat block letters. Hospital record not confirmed. That evening I called the elementary school listed in one of my old records requests. The office assistant was helpful in the way longtime school staff often are. Calm. Efficient. Used to odd questions. She found my enrollment date. 3rd grade. Not kindergarten. Not 1st grade. 3rd. Do you have earlier records? I asked. She said they had a transfer packet on file, but only partial documents had come with it. No original kindergarten enrollment. No preschool records. No immunization sheet from infancy. Just a transfer form and a note that prior documents were unavailable at time of entry. I thanked her too. Then I sat very still at my desk. Not because I was shocked anymore. Because a pattern was beginning to hold. That night Claire came by after her shift, still wearing navy scrubs under a long coat. She brought Thai food and set it on the counter without asking whether I was hungry. "You've got the look," she said. "What look?" The one you get when you've organized something unpleasant into categories. I almost smiled. We ate at the kitchen table with takeout boxes between us. I told her about the hospital call, the school records, the missing early paperwork. Claire listened, chewing slowly. So, she said after a moment, your parents either have explanations for all of this, or they've been covering a lie for 3 decades. I looked down at the legal pad. I keep trying to leave room for the first possibility. That's fair, she said. But don't leave so much room that the truth can't get in. I nodded. Then I reached for my phone. There were 3 missed calls from my mother now. 1 from my father. No messages from him. Just the calls. That was unusual. My father was not a man who called repeatedly unless something had unsettled him. A few minutes later, while Claire was rinsing out our takeout containers, my phone lit up again. Mom calling. This time I answered. "Hi, sweetheart," my mother said, too quickly. I was starting to worry. "I've been busy." A pause. "You sound tired." "I am." Another pause, longer this time. Then she said, lightly, almost casually, "Are you in some kind of trouble?" It was such a strange question that for a moment I didn't answer. "No," I said. "Why would I be?" "Oh, no reason. You've just seemed distant." I leaned back in the chair and looked at the legal pad in front of me. There are moments when people reveal more by the direction of a question than by the question itself. She had not asked whether I was sick. She had not asked whether something happened at work. She had asked whether I was in trouble, as if trouble was the category she had been expecting. "I met someone this week," I said. Silence. Not static. Not a dropped line. Silence. Then, very carefully, she asked who. "A woman in Seattle. Her name is Linda Archer." I heard her inhale. It was small. Barely there. But it was enough. Claire looked up from the sink. I kept my voice even. She thought I looked like someone she knew. My mother didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her tone had changed. Not louder. Just tighter. "You don't need to talk to strangers about your life, Daniel." That was the first time in years she had used that voice with me. The one meant for childhood. For correction. For closing a door before questions could enter the room. I let a few seconds pass before speaking. "I'm not talking about my life," I said. "I'm verifying facts." My mother said nothing. Then my father's voice came on the line, sudden and unplanned, as if he had been standing there all along. "Come down this weekend," he said. "We should talk in person." His tone was controlled, but it had none of its usual warmth. I looked at the steam rising from the sink, at Claire standing still with a wet container in her hands. "About what?" I asked. Another brief silence. Then he said, "About whatever this is." I wrote something on the legal pad while he was speaking. "They know." "I can come Sunday," I said. "Good," he replied. My mother came back on the line then, softer now, almost pleading. "We love you, Daniel." I closed my eyes for a moment. "I know," I said. And then I ended the call. Claire dried her hands and came back to the table. "Well?" she asked. I turned the legal pad toward her. She read the line and exhaled slowly. "You're not going down there alone," she said. I shook my head. "I am." "That's a mistake." "No," I said. Going too early was the mistake. This part has to be clean. Claire looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once. She understood what I meant. No accusations yet. No improvising. No emotional collision in a doorway. Just facts. Dates. Documents. Responses. That night, close to midnight, an email came in. Subject line, "Your DNA report is ready." I stared at the screen. Then I waited. I didn't open the email right away. The laptop sat on the kitchen table with the message visible on the screen. The subject line was simple and clinical. No bright colors. No dramatic language. Just a notification that a process had finished. Claire was still sitting across from me. She didn't rush me. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. She understood that some moments need to arrive on their own. The apartment was quiet except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a car passed slowly through the wet street. I finally opened the report. No music. No pause for suspense. Just data. A percentage. 99.9% biological match, Linda Archer. Sibling relationship probability. For a few seconds, I didn't feel anything at all. Not shock. Not anger. Just a strange sense of alignment, like two pieces of a puzzle finally touching after years of sitting in the same box. Claire leaned forward slightly. "Well?" she asked. I turned the laptop so she could see. She read the line once. Then again. Her expression didn't change much, but I saw the moment the information settled in. So she said quietly, "Your name was Evan." I leaned back in the chair. That appears to be the case. The strange thing about learning something this large is that the brain doesn't always react dramatically. Sometimes it simply begins reorganizing the facts around the new center. That was what I felt happening. My childhood memories, the missing photos, the incomplete records, the way my parents had reacted on the phone. Everything was shifting slightly into a clearer shape. Claire closed the laptop gently. "What's your next move?" I picked up the legal pad again. There was still one blank space beneath the earlier list. I wrote another line. Step 4, document confirmation before confrontation. Claire watched me write. "You already have the DNA," she said. "Yes," I replied, "but I want the timeline complete." She nodded. "That's the editor in you." "Or the survivor," I said. We both sat quietly for a moment. Then I sent Linda a short message. The results came in. "I'd like to meet tomorrow." Her reply arrived less than a minute later. "Of course." The next morning, we met again at the same cafe. Linda looked tired, but she didn't rush toward me or ask questions the moment I walked in. She waited until we were seated. I placed the printed DNA report on the table between us. She read it slowly. Then she placed both hands flat on the table and closed her eyes for a moment. Not crying, just breathing. When she opened them again, her voice was steady. I wasn't sure I would live long enough to see that. I nodded. "I'm glad you did." For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "What happens now?" It was a fair question, but I had already been thinking about it. "There are 2 things I need," I said. "Anything." First, I said, "I need every document you have from the original investigation. Police reports, timelines, anything your family kept." Linda nodded immediately. "I brought some already." She opened the tote bag and began removing folders. The materials were organized carefully. Newspaper articles, police contact summaries, search maps, interview transcripts. I appreciated the order. The second thing I asked for surprised her. "I need the exact date you last saw him." June 17th, 1998. And the time. Late afternoon. Around 4:30. I wrote it down. Linda watched me. "You're building something," she said. "Yes." "What?" "A sequence." I explained it simply. If someone removed a child from one place and introduced that child into another life, there has to be a bridge between those 2 points. Linda understood immediately. "You're looking for when your parents entered the picture." "Yes." She sat back slowly. "I never thought about it like that." "Most people don't," I said. "But systems leave traces." She studied me for a moment. "You're very calm about this." I thought about that. "I'm not calm," I said. "I'm organized." That seemed to satisfy her. Before we left, she reached into her bag one more time and handed me a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed 2 children sitting on a porch step. One older girl with long hair. One younger boy holding a stuffed rabbit with long ears. Linda pointed at the rabbit. "You called him Button." The word landed somewhere deep inside me. Still not a memory, but close enough to recognition that I felt something move. I slid the photo back into the envelope and put it carefully into my jacket pocket. That evening, I drove south to Tacoma. The highway was quiet. Rain tapped softly against the windshield. The radio stayed off. My parents' house looked exactly the same as it always had. Small white siding. Red front door. The lawn trimmed so precisely it almost looked artificial. My father opened the door before I knocked. He had always been a composed man, but now there was tension in the way he held his shoulders. "Come in," he said. My mother was already sitting in the living room. There were 3 glasses of water on the coffee table. Prepared. Organized. They had been waiting. I sat down across from them and placed a thin folder on the table. Inside it were only 3 things: the DNA report, the hospital verification email, and the elementary school transfer record. I didn't speak yet. My father looked at the folder. My mother looked at my face. Finally, my father said quietly, "What exactly are you trying to prove?" I slid the DNA report out of the folder and placed it in front of them. Neither of them touched it. My mother read the first line without picking it up. Her hands began to tremble slightly. My father remained very still. After a moment, he said, "Where did you get this?" "A laboratory." The room stayed silent for several seconds. Then my mother whispered something I had not expected. "Oh God." She covered her mouth with her hand. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees. His voice was lower now. "Daniel, there are things about that time you don't understand." I shook my head slightly. "That may be true," I said. Then I placed the second document on the table. "The hospital where my birth certificate says I was born has no record of the delivery." My father didn't move. My mother closed her eyes. Finally, I placed the third document down. "And my school records show I first appeared in the system at age 8. I leaned back in the chair. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then I said quietly, "So I'd like to understand something." I looked at both of them. "When exactly did you find me?" Neither of them answered. The silence stretched long enough that the sound of the kitchen clock began to feel loud. Then my mother started crying. And my father finally spoke. My father did not raise his voice. That was the first thing I noticed. He sat forward slightly, hands clasped, looking at the documents on the coffee table as if they belonged to someone else. My mother was crying beside him, but quietly, with a folded tissue pressed to her mouth, like she was trying not to disturb the room any further. When he finally spoke, his tone was flat with effort. "We were told you needed a home." I looked at him and said nothing. He kept his eyes on the papers. "It was through someone Robert knew from a contracting job in Oregon," my mother said, her words broken by breath. "A woman who said there was a boy being neglected, that he'd been left behind, that no one would come looking." I turned to her. "Who is the woman?" She shook her head immediately. "I never knew her full name." That was the first answer I didn't believe. I did not challenge it. Not yet. Instead, I reached into my folder and took out a notebook. I placed it on my knee and clicked a pen open. My father noticed. "Are you writing this down?" "Yes." The room went still again. That changed things. It made this less like a family conversation and more like what it actually was, a record. I asked the next question the same way I would ask for a date on a manuscript contract. "What year?" My father answered this time, 1999. So a year after Evan Archer disappeared. He closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." I wrote that down. My mother began to speak again, more quickly now, like once the first part was out, the rest wanted out too. "We didn't take you from a yard. We didn't do that. We were told everything had already happened. That there had been trouble, that there were drugs around, that records could be arranged, that if we asked too many questions, you'd end up in the system." I looked at her. "Who arranged the records?" She cried harder. My father answered instead. "The woman handled the paperwork." "What woman?" He looked up at me for the first time. "Her name was Denise Keller." That name meant nothing to me, so I wrote it down. Then I asked, "Did you ever try to verify any of it?" My father's silence answered before his words did. "Not the way we should have." That was the closest either of them had come to honesty without hiding behind sentiment. I nodded once. Then I asked the only question that mattered to me now. "At any point, did either of you suspect I was a missing child?" My mother started shaking her head immediately, but my father did not. He stayed very still. I watched him for a few seconds. Then I said, "I want a direct answer." His jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. My mother looked at him sharply, shocked that he had said it aloud. He kept going. "Not at first. But later, yes. There were articles. A photo once. Your mother saw it and threw the paper away." He paused. "We told ourselves it was coincidence. Then too much time had passed. Then it became something we did not know how to undo." I wrote every word. My mother looked at me through tears. "We loved you," she said. That part was real. I capped the pen for a second, then uncapped it again. I'm sure it was, I said. That isn't the question. My voice stayed even. I wanted it that way. No argument. No performance. Just definition. You built a family around a crime, I said. And then you protected the family by protecting the lie. My mother bent forward and covered her face. My father looked older in that moment than I had ever seen him. No one shouted. No one needed to. I opened my folder again and placed a single sheet of paper on the table between us. It was a typed page I had prepared before driving down. My father glanced at it. What is this? Boundaries, I said. He looked at me, then back at the page. It was simple. No unannounced visits. No contact with Linda Archer or her family. All future communication in writing for now. Names, dates, and anything remembered about Denise Keller to be sent within 72 hours. No denial of biological identity in any future communication. My mother looked at the list and gave a small, wounded sound. You came here with terms? I came here with structure. That landed the way I intended it to. My father picked up the page and read it fully. Then he asked, and if we don't agree? I met his eyes. Then I proceed without your cooperation. He understood what that meant. Police. Civil records. Possibly media, depending on how far the original chain went. Maybe adoption fraud. Maybe something worse. I did not have to say any of it. He set the paper down. We'll give you what we remember. I nodded once. My mother was crying again, but more quietly now, as if exhaustion had replaced panic. After a while, my father stood and went into the back room. When he returned, he was holding a small metal lockbox. He set it on the coffee table and opened it with a key from his pocket. Inside were old documents, a receipt for legal filing fees, a motel invoice from Eugene dated August 1999, a folded note with a phone number and the name Denise written in my father's handwriting, and beneath those, a photograph I had never seen before. Me, maybe 7 years old, sitting on a motel bed, not smiling. The wallpaper behind me was yellow with tiny blue flowers. I stared at the picture for a long time. That was the first image of myself that felt truly unknown, not missing, hidden. My father said we kept telling ourselves we'd destroy these. But you didn't, I said. No, I slipped the photograph into my folder. Then the receipt. Then the note. I stood. Neither of them asked me to stay. At the door, my mother said my name. Not Daniel. Not this time. She said, very softly, Evan. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. Then I walked out into the rain. I did not drive straight home. I parked 2 blocks away from the water near Ruston and sat in the car with the engine off, listening to the rain tick lightly against the windshield. The folder was on the passenger seat beside me. I did not open it right away. There are moments when the truth arrives in pieces, and then there are moments when it becomes physical. Paper, ink, handwriting, dates, a motel receipt with a city on it, a phone number written by the man who raised you. That was the kind of truth I had now. Not theory, not instinct. A record. I called Claire first. She answered on the second ring. Well, I have documents, I said. Her voice changed immediately. Are you okay? Yes, I said. Not good, but clear. That was enough for her. Come back to Seattle, she said. We'll sort it. So I did. By the time I got home, Claire had cleared my kitchen table and set out 3 legal pads, 2 pens, and her laptop. She had the practical instincts of someone who had spent years in rooms where emotion mattered, but process still had to happen. I put the folder on the table and we started. First, we made a timeline. June 17, 1998, Evan Archer disappears from a backyard in Eugene. August 1999, motel receipt places Robert in Eugene. Same period, Denise Keller appears in handwritten notes. Following year, new identity documents begin to surface. Age 8, I appear in school records with incomplete transfer paperwork. Once it was written out in sequence, the shape of it became undeniable. This was not an informal rescue. It was not a misunderstanding that had drifted too far to fix. There had been movement across state lines, false records, and years of deliberate silence. Claire read through the note with Denise's phone number again. Did your father say what she did? No, she's either the broker or the bridge, Claire said. That was exactly right. The next morning, I sent 2 emails and made 4 calls. The first email went to Linda. I have proof. More than admissions. Can we meet today? The second went to an attorney in Seattle whose practice included identity fraud and historical family custody cases. I kept it brief and factual. No dramatic language. Just names, dates, a DNA result, and mention of false documents. Then I called the non-emergency line in Eugene and asked, carefully, how old missing child records are handled when a now-adult victim is believed to have been identified. The woman who transferred me did not sound surprised, which I found oddly comforting. By noon, I was seated in a conference room at the attorney's office. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. Mid-50s, gray jacket, square glasses, the kind of person who moved through paper like it had a pulse. She read the summary I had brought without interrupting. When she finished, she folded her hands and asked, "What outcome do you want?" That was the right question. Not what happened. Not how did I feel. What outcome? I answered carefully. First, I want my identity formally corrected where possible. Second, I want the original case reopened or at least updated to reflect that the missing child was located. Third, I want legal distance and structured contact from the people who raised me. And fourth, I want to know whether Denise Keller trafficked other children or falsified other identities. Rebecca nodded once and began making notes. That's clear, she said. Good. She explained the likely process. A police interview in Oregon. Submission of the DNA evidence and supporting documents. Separate petitions for amended identity records, depending on the state agencies involved. Potential criminal exposure for Robert and Elise Hartley, although the age of the case and evidentiary gaps would affect what prosecutors might do. And Denise Keller, if alive, would matter a great deal. Do not contact her yourself, Rebecca said. I wasn't planning to. Good. She glanced at the handwritten note again. We let systems do the work now. That phrase stayed with me. It was, in some ways, the whole story. For years, systems had been used to hide me. Now they would be used to return me. That afternoon, I met Linda at her house instead of the cafe. It was a small 2-story place with ivy along one side and too many picture frames on the walls. It smelled like tomato sauce and laundry detergent. Warm. Lived in. Margaret was there too. Linda's younger daughter. 36, dark hair pinned back loosely, calm in the way some people become calm after spending years beside grief. She didn't overwhelm me with emotion. She just set a mug of coffee near my elbow and sat down. I laid out the documents one by one. The motel receipt. The handwritten name. The photo from the motel room. Linda read in silence. When she reached the receipt, she pressed her fingertips lightly to her mouth and looked out the window. Margaret picked up the note with Denise's name and said, "That's enough to start." She was right. Not enough to finish everything, but enough to move from family truth into official truth. I told them about the attorney, the likely police contact, the identity correction process. Linda listened carefully. Then she said something I appreciated more than if she had cried. What do you need from us? Not what do we do. What do you need? A copy of every original record you still have, I said. And patience. You have both, she replied. Margaret left the room and returned a few minutes later with another small box. Inside were duplicates of the original flyers, a church bulletin with Evan's picture, and a set of dates Linda had typed years ago from memory and later checked against official records. I looked through them slowly. There was no sudden emotional flood, no cinematic recovery of memory. That is not how it happened. What I felt instead was steadier than that. A growing sense that the truth no longer depended on anyone's version of events. It existed outside all of us now. On paper, in records, in sequence. That mattered. 3 days later, Rebecca called. She had already had a preliminary conversation with authorities in Oregon. The case files still existed, dormant but preserved. The detective assigned to historical review wanted to speak with me by video first, then likely in person if needed. There was more. Rebecca had run Denise Keller through public records. She was dead, passed away 9 years earlier in Arizona. But before that, she had used 3 different surnames, worked intermittently with private fostering networks, and had been named in 2 civil complaints involving document irregularities in unrelated guardianship cases. Nothing had led to a criminal conviction. Not enough evidence at the time. Rebecca said it plainly. This may be bigger than your case, even if no one fully built it back then. I stood at my apartment window while she talked, looking down at a delivery truck idling beside the curb. Do you think Robert and Elise will be charged? I think, she said, they will be investigated. Whether that becomes prosecution depends on proof of knowledge, timing, and what records survive. But consequences do not begin and end with criminal court. She was right about that too. By the end of the week, I had done the first formal interview with the detective in Eugene. Calm questions. Precise dates. Confirmation of the DNA result. Review of the motel photo and the note. He did not speculate. I respected that. At one point he asked, "Did the Hartleys admit they believed you might have been a missing child?" "Yes," I said. "My father did. Do you have that in writing?" "Not yet." That evening I received it. An email from Robert. No greeting beyond my name. No attempt to soften what he was saying. Just a short paragraph. You asked for honesty. By late 2000, I believed there was a real possibility you had been taken from another family. I did not go to the police. I told myself too much time had passed and that turning it in would destroy your life and ours. I see now that this was cowardice dressed up as protection. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Rebecca. Third-party confirmation. Exactly the kind that holds. A few days later, Elise sent a separate message. Shorter. Less composed. She admitted she had once recognized my face in a newspaper article and hidden it. I forwarded that too. Truth, again, through documents. Not arguments. Not apologies. Records. The formal consequences unfolded quietly after that. The missing child case in Oregon was updated from unresolved disappearance to located adult survivor pending final identity reconciliation. My legal filings began. The process was not fast, but it was orderly. Amended records. Affidavits. Certified copies. Agency letters. Every week, another piece aligned. Robert and Elise retained counsel. They entered therapy, according to their attorney, and agreed in writing to the communication limits I had set. Monthly contact only. No surprise visits. No outreach to Linda or Margaret. Full cooperation with document requests. I did not celebrate any of this. That would have been the wrong shape for it. What I felt was not victory. It was relief with paperwork attached. One Tuesday evening, after sending another packet to Rebecca, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the small envelope Linda had given me earlier. The photo of the boy with the stuffed rabbit was still inside. On the back, in faded blue ink, someone had written, "Evan won't sleep without button again." I turned the photo over in my hands and looked at it for a long time. Then I placed it beside the motel photograph. 2 boys. Same face. Different lives. And for the first time, I understood that the gap between them was no longer empty. It had been filled with dates, names, records, and truth. My phone buzzed on the table. A new message from Rebecca. Court date for the name petition confirmed. I'll send the details in the morning. I read it once. Then I set the phone face down. And I waited. The morning of the court hearing was quiet. Seattle was still gray with the kind of light that makes the city look softer than it really is. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was anxious, but because my body had learned over the past few months that certain days required a little more stillness at the beginning. I made coffee the same way I always did. Kettle first, then the small grinder, then the slow pour into the glass dripper that Claire once told me made me look like I was conducting a laboratory experiment. The apartment was calm. Papers were stacked neatly on the dining table. Rebecca had emailed the final instructions the night before. The filing was simple compared to everything that had come before it. Name confirmation. Identity correction. Official record alignment. No drama. No speeches. Just the legal acknowledgement of what had already become true. I drove downtown just after 8. The courthouse lobby smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. People were moving through metal detectors, carrying folders and envelopes and quiet anxieties that belonged to their own lives. Rebecca was already there when I arrived. She handed me a thin packet and said, "Nothing unexpected today. The judge just needs confirmation and signatures." That was exactly how it happened. 10 minutes inside a courtroom that felt more administrative than symbolic. The judge reviewed the documents. The DNA report. The police verification from Oregon. The affidavit describing the identity change. Then he adjusted his glasses, signed the order, and said simply, "Your records will now reflect the amended legal name." That was it. No applause. No emotional moment. Just a stamp on a page. Afterward, Rebecca shook my hand. "You handled this better than most people would," she said. "I organized it," I replied. She smiled slightly. "Yes," she said. "You did." Later that afternoon, I met Linda at the same cafe where we had first sat across from each other weeks earlier. She arrived carrying a small box. Not a folder this time. A wooden box with worn edges. "I thought you might want this," she said. Inside were a few things that had belonged to Evan. A camp bracelet. A crayon drawing of a whale. And the stuffed rabbit. Button. I held it carefully. The fabric was faded and the ears were worn thin where small fingers had once gripped them for years. Still no clear memory came back. But that no longer bothered me. Memory is not the only form of truth. Sometimes objects hold enough of it. Linda watched me quietly. "You don't have to remember everything," she said. "I know." We sat there for a while, drinking coffee and watching the street traffic move slowly past the window. Eventually she asked, "What will you do now?" I thought about that. For a long time, my answer had been simple survival, then investigation, then correction. But now those steps were finished. "I'll keep doing the same work," I said. Editing manuscripts, paying bills, buying groceries on Wednesday mornings. She smiled. "And Evan." I looked down at the rabbit in my hands. "Evan doesn't need to take over the life Daniel built," I said. "He just needed to come home." That seemed to satisfy her. Life settled again after that. Not the same as before, but steadier. Robert and Elise kept their word about the boundaries. Once a month we met for dinner at a quiet restaurant halfway between Tacoma and Seattle. Conversations were careful, but honest. They were in therapy, and I could see the effort they were making to face what they had done. I did not rush forgiveness. Forgiveness is not a deadline. But I also refused to carry the weight of their choices. That belonged to them. Linda and Margaret became part of my life slowly. Tuesday coffee with Linda became a routine. Sometimes we talked about the past. Sometimes we talked about ordinary things like gardening or the latest book I was editing. Margaret texted occasionally. Short messages. Pictures of her son Jude holding up school drawings or standing proudly beside a science project. One day, she sent a photo of the old swing set that had been rebuilt in Linda's backyard. The caption simply said, "Still standing." I kept the wooden box on the nightstand beside my bed, not as a monument, just as a reminder that a story can begin in one place and continue in another without losing its meaning. A few months later, Rebecca called again. Not about my case. About another one. There had been an inquiry from a man in Portland who believed his identity might have been altered during a private guardianship arrangement in the late 1990s. The name Denise Keller had appeared in one of the archived documents. Rebecca said, "The detective remembered your case. He wondered if you might be willing to talk with the man." I stood at my kitchen window while she explained. Rain was tapping softly against the glass again. The same sound as the night I first opened the DNA report. "Does he know what he's walking into?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. I thought about the cafe, the folder of documents, the moment the truth became something you could hold in your hands. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll talk to him." Because sometimes the quiet work of putting one life back together can help someone else start the same process. And that, I've learned, is a story worth continuing. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. These kinds of journeys are quieter than people expect, but they matter deeply to the people living them. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this community grow. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Tell me your city and what time it is there right now down in the comments. 2 other stories that many listeners found meaningful will appear on your screen next. You might want to listen to those next.